Welcome to Block 46 of our Celebrating the States Block of the Month. This is our version of the South Carolina Crossroads block. For this block, you will need two fabrics, a light and a dark. From the light fabric, cut one strip that's 2.5 inches by the width of fabric and two strips that are 1.5 inches by the width of fabric. Cut the 1.5 inch strips on the fold to get 4 strips that are 1.5 inches by about 21 inches. From the 2.5 inch strip of light fabric, cut 9 squares that are 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. From the dark fabric, cut one strip that's 2.5 inches by the width of fabric and two strips that are 1.5 inches by the width of fabric. The 1.5 inch strips also need to be cut on the fold to get 4 strips that are 1.5 inches by about 21 inches. From the 2.5 inch strip of the dark fabric, cut 8 rectangles that are 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. When piecing this block together, use 1/4 inch seam allowances. We're going to start this block by sewing a dark strip to a light strip. You only want to make 2 of these. When sewing all my strip sets, I'm going to keep the dark fabric on top. Press both of these to the dark fabric. I like to press my pieces flat first and then press to the dark fabric. Next, we're going to use one more of each of the strips. We're going to make a version that is dark, light, dark strip set and a light, dark, light strip set. I'm going to remember to keep the dark fabric on the top. For both of these strip sets, you're going to press to the dark fabric. Once pressed, each of these strip sets should be 3.5 inches wide. Now it's time to subcut the strip sets. For the light, dark, light strip set, you need to cut 8 sections that are 1.5 inches wide. I start with a 6-inch cut and then cut at the 4.5 inch mark, the 3-inch mark, and the 1.5 inch mark. From the dark, light, dark strip set, you need to cut 4 sections that are 2.5 inches wide and 4 sections that are 1.5 inches wide. I always cut the widest sections first. That way, if I make a mistake, I can still use them to cut the smaller sections. The first thing we're going to make is 4 9-patch units using the 1.5-inch wide sections. If you always press toward the dark fabric, all the seams should nest together as you're sewing. Each of the 9-patch units should have the light fabric in each of the corners. Press towards the center row on each of these blocks, so press towards that dark center row. I found it easiest to press from the wrong side. Once pressed, each of these 9-patch units will measure 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. The block is made up of 5 rows. The outer rows are made of 6 2.5-inch squares of the light fabric and 4 rectangles of the dark fabric. Start by sewing a light square to each of the dark rectangles. Next, you will want to sew a light square between 2 dark rectangles. For these rows, you will want to press towards the dark fabric. This row will measure 2.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Next, we're going to make the center row. For this row, you're going to use 2 of the light dark 2.5-inch sections and the remaining 3 light squares. Start by sewing a light square to each of the 2.5-inch wide sections. Sew the last light square between the 2 piece sections. Press all of these seams towards the dark fabrics. This row should also measure 2.5 inches by 12.5 inches. For the final 2 rows of the block, start by sewing the 2.5-inch by 3.5-inch dark rectangles to each of the 9-patch blocks. Piece the remaining 2.5-inch wide dark, light, dark subcuts between the 9-patch blocks. Press towards the dark fabric and the center rectangle. Once pressed, these rows should measure 3.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Now it's time to sew all the rows together. Start by sewing the 2.5-inch wide outer rows to the 9-patch block rows. You will make 2 of these units. If you've been pressing to the dark, when you sew this block together, all these seams should nest together quite easily. Press away from the 9-patch rows. Once pressed, these sections should measure 5.5 inches by 12.5 inches. We have 2 seams left and our South Carolina block is done. Sew the remaining center row between the 9-patch block rows. All of the seams will nest together if you've been pressing towards the dark fabric. We just need to do one final pressing to make sure our block is nice and flat. Press away from the 9-patch block rows. You can press from the back or you can press from the front, whatever is easiest for you. Once pressed, this block will measure 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Block 46 is done. There's just 4 more to go. We hope that you will give us a thumbs up for our South Carolina Crossroads block. Leave a comment for us. Tell us how you're doing on your Celebrating the States Block of the Month. And subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks for watching and happy quilting!